This episode of Playing on a Budget is brought to you by CoolStuffInc.com, the #1 source of games and gaming accessories, and by GatheringMagic.com, the #1 source of Magic the Gathering news and articles. Hi there, this is Kevin for GatheringMagic.com, here with a new video series called Playing on a Budget. The reason why we're doing this series is for players who are on a budget or new to Magic to have a deck idea to go into maybe their first F&M or competitive tournament and actually not get smashed, but actually have a competitive time without breaking their wallet. A lot of the standard decks right now can run around $600 to $800 for the Jund list or Esper control list, or some even those UWR flash lists. So building on a budget, a lot of people cannot afford that. So budget decks definitely are a topic that need to be talked about. Also, budget decks do have a special place in my heart because they did allow me to get back into Magic. Recently, I just qualified for a Pro Tour Dragon's Maze, and I did it with a budget deck, which I'll get into later, but I wouldn't have ever been able to get back into Magic if it wasn't for a budget deck, the budget deck that you see here in front of you. What happened to me is back a year ago, my car windows were bashed in, and my cards were stolen, and it was about, I would estimate it was about $5,000 worth of cards. I had all the Legacy staples, play sets of the fetch lands from Legacy, play sets of the fetch lands from Modern. I had a couple Modern decks built. Basically had every standard deck imaginable at the time, as I just competed in Grand Prix Salt Lake, and it was devastating. It was devastating to have all my cards stolen, and I took a break from Magic. I decided I was done with Magic because it's hard to overcome a loss like that. But I decided to join an Avacyn Restored pre-release with my friends, and I was able to pull a Temporal Mastery that was trading for $40 at the time. And I said, okay, what the heck? I'll go back into Magic. Let's see what I can get for this Temporal Mastery. And at the time, the Razorverge Thickets were going for, I believe, around like $5. And the Sun Petal Groves were extremely cheap. So I was able to trade the Temporal Mastery for 4 Razorverge Thickets and 4 Sun Petal Groves. As at Grand Prix Salt Lake, I did end up going 6-3, missing out on day 2 with a green-white aggro list. Very similar to this. It wasn't a pod, but it was kind of similar to this. And then the next day at the Star City Open, I was able to take 11th with it. I was able to, out of, I think there was 322 players, and I was able to take 11th. So I always liked my green-white deck. So I decided that, hey, I got this Temporal Mastery. I got a Restoration Angel for was the pre-release card at the time for Avacyn Restored. So I had the Restoration Angel and now a playset of the lands I needed. So I thought, hey, I could probably build a budget pod deck that could be competitive and join an F&M. So the next day, I went to the store and I was able to buy some Birds of Paradise. They were at like $3 at the time, and I was able to pick up some Avacyn Pilgrims for free off my friends, and one more Arbor Elf. I thought 9 mana dorks would be great. Visionaries off my friends for free, and Viridian Emissary. And the Blade Splicers were about $1.50 at the time, which was an awesome deal. They were a great card even back then, but they were just I think they were printed in a couple pre-constructed decks or intro decks. I can't remember why Blade Splicers were so cheap when they were a heavy use card in Standard, but yeah, at $1.50 I was able to pick them up. And more commons like Master Splicer that I got for free, and Borderland Rangers. And I think Birthing Pods at the time were like $2 to $3, as they had just been reprinted in a intro deck, or not an intro deck, a tournament deck, for 2 of them in the deck. So I was able to get the pods and buy a Phyrexian Metamorph for I think around $5, and a Solemn Simulacrum for around $5. And basically the rest of these cards were either bulk rares, like Angel Glory's Rise was a bulk rare at the time, Captain of the Watch was a bulk rare, Ketz's Cagebreaker was a bulk rare, and Precursor Golem was a bulk rare, and then two more uncommons that were very easy to find. And then also picked up some Gavany Townships and just threw this deck together and said, okay, it's competitive, I'll take it at F&M. Well, 4 F&Ms later, I had won every one of those F&Ms with this very, very budget Birthing Pod deck. And it was very great because the promo at the time of that F&M was the Lingering Souls promo, and they were trading like hotcakes at like $10 a piece. And so I was able to get my money back just from the Lingering Souls promos, and able to actually trade them for cards further cards to make this deck better, like an Elish Norn and a Wormcoil Engine. I think I added to this deck, and eventually just kind of had a green-white pod deck that was very, very competitive. So my whole point of this long-winded story is that budget decks are very, very possible to make, even in this very expensive standard. This is one of the most expensive standards in a long time, I would say, since the good old Jace the Mind Sculptor days, as we are looking at decks, like I said, around $600, $800. So to be able to put together a deck on $100 and compete with these decks is a good opportunity for players that do not have huge pockets. So anyway, a few months later, after this story, my local game store really wanted to start pushing the modern format. And so the store owner got with me and he's like, hey, I really want you to play in modern. Is there a deck you can throw together, and get these other players interested in playing? And I looked at the metagame at the time, and man, decks were incredibly expensive. We're talking about $1,100 Jund decks or $900 kind of these blue-white control decks, and it was just wow. The fetch lands were crazy expensive already. So I looked at this old Soul Sisters build that seemed like it was very competitive, and I put it together for about $50. Some of these cards have gone up in price from then, but the time I picked this deck up, it was very cheap. I mean, I use these Kabira Crossroads as my non-basic land. I've since replaced those with Windbrace Heights, but the first time I ran this, it was Kabira Crossroads. And Martyr of the Sands are very, very cheap. They're just uncommons from Cold Snap. Sarah's Ascendant at the time were like $3 to $4. They've gone up to, I believe, a lot more than that now. And then the Soul Wardens and Soul's Attendants are commons as well. The Raise the Alarms are common. Honor the Pure has been reprinted a bazillion times. And Journey to the Nowheres was my poor man's Path to Exile, which actually works pretty well in Modern. Not as well now that Abrupt Decay is a card, but at the time it was definitely a good replacement for Path to Exile. And then good old Johnny's Pridemates, which were uncommons, and Squadron Hawks, which are commons, and then Ranger of Eos. So this deck I basically threw together for under $50, played in the very first Modern tournament, and again, I won it. It was a lot of people came with their Jund lists and their mono red lists, and this Soul Sister deck does very well against both of those. And again, it was just another instance where budget decks paid off, won me a couple local tournaments. And the cool thing about this story is that I decided to just keep playing this modern deck, and I upgraded it to the Soul Sisters deck that you can check out on my YouTube channel, where I was able to win a PTQ Salt Lake with Soul Sisters. A more expensive version of Soul Sisters. I do have the Path to Exiles, and I was running some more pricey cards in there, but basically the same shell of the deck, the same good old Soul's Attendant, Soul Warden, Sarah's Attendants, and Johnny's Pridemate. So it is very possible to even win a major tournament with a budget deck, as Soul Sisters did get me a plane ticket to Pro Tour Dragon's Maze, which I'm very excited about playing it. So that brings us to this week's budget deck. GatheringMagic.com asked me to do a video on a budget deck that would be competitive in Standard right now. So I scoured the lists of competitive decks right now. I was thinking about a mono red build. I was thinking about an RG aggro build. But ultimately, budget decks, if you really want to get a new player into Magic, you want to avoid the dual lands. Lands are very unexciting to a new player, and sticking with one color can be very attractive as well to a new player, as the different, they don't understand a curve very well. They don't understand why dual lands are so important. So basically having this mono green list is a great way to learn, and it's competitive. They won't get smashed. At least it won't be the deck's fault if they do get smashed. And it has some very powerful cards in this mono green list. And so let's just go over this list, and just to show you that this deck is a legitimate deck. I kind of built this off of a very high placed finished in a modern, or a standard premiere that was recently played on MTGO. Standard premieres usually are I believe 9 rounds. I'm not sure. I have to check on that. But there are a lot of rounds that they're very comparable to a big, like a Star City Open or some sort of larger tournament like that. So let's look at this deck here. This is by K Thunder. He took 3rd place in the Standard Premiere. And he ran a total of 24 lands with a Ghost Quarter and 23 forests, with 4 Arbor Elves, Deadbridge Goliath, Predator Ooze, which is kind of one of the centerpieces of this deck, Strangleroot Geist, Ulvenwald Tracker, Vorapede, Wolfir Avenger, Wolfir Silverheart, Yeva Nature's Herald, Garruk Primal Hunter, Pit Fight, Rancor, and Revenge of the Hunted. The only card over $5 that we would have to cut here to make a budget is Garruk Primal Hunter. He's the only guy that's over it. So this is a very, very affordable deck. And the sideboard, again, we can cut the Thragtusk here. Those are quite expensive. But besides the Garruk Primal Hunter and the Thragtusk, everything in here is very affordable. And he took it all the way to a 3rd place finish, which is very impressive on a standard premiere. So back to our deck. This is my budget version of it. Like I said, I did cut the Garruk Primal Hunters. So let's just go over the prices of these rares here. I looked them up recently on CoolStuffInc.com, and Revenge of the Hunted is by far the best bargain out of this deck. It is 50 cents a piece. Very powerful card. You'll definitely want to miracle it early on and slap it to like a Strangleroot Geist or something. Kill the opposing creatures on your opponent's board and get in there with trample damage. Very powerful if you miracle it. It's actually not that bad of a card if you have to hardcast it. It's 6 mana is definitely feasible in this deck. So 50 cents, it is a bargain. We're going on to Wolfir Silverhearts. They're also very inexpensive. On CoolStuffInc.com, they are sitting at $2 is all. I think they're so cheap because they do come in an intro deck for Avacyn Restored, and so the market was a bit flooded with Wolfir Silverhearts. Going on to Vorapede, it's a mythic that is also very affordable. It's about $4 a piece, and it's very powerful in this deck. The Undying is very good against the format's changed to more of a spot removal rather than a board sweeper, and it's actually very good against board sweepers anyway, except for Terminus, and we have seen Terminus kind of go by the wayside. Most of the blue decks are just running Supreme Verdicts and then spot removal, especially like the Esper control builds. They've cut Terminus recently, so Vorapede is very strong in the meta and a very good replacement for Thragtusk if you cannot afford the Thragtusk yet. Going on to Yeva, she's very inexpensive as well. She's about 75 cents. Again, she's I believe she's in the intro packs to M13. So another very affordable card. Deadbridge Goliath was a game day promo, and Return to Ravnica rares, most of them are pretty cheap anyway. This guy will only run you at $1.50, and then the remainder of our cards here are mostly commons and uncommons, except for Predator Ooze is the most expensive card in this deck, going at $4.50, as well as the uncommon Rancor is $4.50. So that is our only pricey 4-ofs here, is the Rancors and the Predator Oozes, but they're definitely necessary for this deck. This gives your creatures trample. This is one of the most resilient cards ever printed. The only thing that can get rid of it is like Tragic Slips and things that make you sack creatures or Terminus. That's the only thing that will get rid of this guy. He's great with pit fights, and he's great with the Ulvenwald Tracker. This card here only runs about $1.50 as well. So very affordable deck here. Nothing else in this deck is pricey whatsoever. I decided to go with 2 Ghost Quarters rather than one Ghost Quarter, as it is very good against any sort of 3 or 4 color deck. Some of these decks aren't even using basic lands, so this can be a very good land removal. You can take out also key cards such as Kessid Wolf Run or Nephalia Drownyard with Ghost Quarters. So very good all-around card. It fits very well in this deck as it is a mono green list, and you are going to hit your 3 green, or yeah, your 3 green is all you need to hit. That's the highest amount of green that you have in this deck. So Ghost Quarter can be used for all the colorless mana just fine, and you will definitely have your three green mana sources. So onto the sideboard here. I'm going to run Silklash Spider. I am a little bit worried about Thundermaw Hellkites, Restoration Angels, Vampire Nighthawks, and Silklash Spider is very good against all of these. Acidic Slimes are good against those mid-range decks. It can take out Detention Spheres. It can take out any sort of artifact that we might have to worry about, like Key Runes. It can take out lands. Again, those multicolored, those 3-colored, 4-colored decks. Acidic Slime can be a nightmare for them. Triumph of Ferocity comes in against the control matchups, as it is very good card drawing engine. This deck will usually have the biggest creature out of the 2 decks, because we have creatures like a 3/3 for 3 and a 4/4 for 4 or 5/5 for 4. And if the Wolfir Silverheart is paired for anything, you're going to be drawing cards off of this Triumph of Ferocity. Ground Seal is for all of the reanimation decks, for Unburial Rites decks, or Angel of Glory's Rise decks. Ranger's Guile is good against spot removal. As I said, this format has turned over to more spot removal, and Ranger's Guile is very well positioned for that. I'm including another Pit Fight in for the creature-based decks that, like RG Aggro. I think Pit Fight would be great against. And then Tormod's Crypt again for those graveyard strategies. Those do seem to be everywhere. There are a lot of Angel of Glory Rise decks and a lot of just plain old Unburial Rites decks going around. So really liking this deck. So far in the playtest, it's done well. It's done well enough that I'm going to queue it here in a standard daily to see how it does. You know, put my money where my mouth is, and test this budget deck out against, you know, the decks that people are running in the standard daily. So without further ado, let's take this under $100 deck into the standard daily. Wish me luck. This is Kevin with GatheringMagic.com. Thanks for watching.